This is the day the Lord has made. Because he's made it, we rejoice and we're glad in it. I think there's wisdom to that song that says it's the most wonderful time of the year. Y'all thought I was about to say be exalted. I know. It is Christmas season, as you can look around and see our ushers with the red and green, and y'all look snazzy. And the colors and the trees, and it reminds us, man, that this is the Advent season, that in the church calendar there is a time where we gather to not just look at Christmas, the 25th of December, and we celebrate that, but we think about the season of Advent, the 3 to 4 weeks, the 3 weeks leading up to Christmas, and try to understand what it was like for the people who had waited for a Messiah to finally see the Messiah. There was a sense of hope, a sense of desire, a waiting, a patience for the Messiah to come, and then he finally came. And it's good for us to enter into that world and that understanding, to be a part of that feeling of hope that existed in the world as they waited for the Messiah to come. And in one sense, we're still waiting on him to return. We get it. We're waiting on him to return, to right all these wrongs, to fix all these issues, to help all these ailments. We are hoping and waiting for him to return. So it's with that in mind that I ask you to turn to Psalm 131. I hear you, Sister Corny. We are going to get back to Colossians. We are. Not in the next 3 weeks, though, but we're going to get to Colossians when the Lord has us there. Psalm 131, when you're there, you can indicate that you're there by standing. If it's a bit too much for you to stand, ain't nobody mad. I get it. Seasons changed. It done all of a sudden got warm. I know arthritis is touching somebody this morning. Always. I know. Well, let me get there too, by the way. I'm over here laughing and talking. Psalm 131. And it reads as following. Lord, my heart is not proud. My eyes are not haughty. I do not get involved with things too great or too wondrous for me. Instead, I have calmed and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child with its mother, my soul is like a weaned child. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forever. I want to speak for the little bit of this morning and a little bit of this afternoon on the subject, cultivating childlike dependence. Cultivating childlike dependence. Will you join me in prayer? Most Holy Father, thank you for this time we have. God, it's a joy and a privilege to prepare to hear you and then to hear you. It's evidence that you are a God who indeed still speaks. And long before Jesus ever echoed the words in Matthew 18, unless you become a child, you won't see the kingdom of heaven, David set it out for us in Psalm 131. God, as we dive into this, as you are seeking to cultivate in all of us, from the preacher to the usher, from the east of the church to the west of the church, to from the north of the church to the south of the church, no matter the age, length of time as a member, you're wanting to cultivate in us a childlike dependence. And God, my prayer is that you help me as I bring your word to your people, that you would give me clarity of thought and boldness of speech. Help me to make this clear. And I pray that you would work on our hearts to change our hearts. Make us more like you, Jesus. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart, let these things be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. It's in Jesus' name we pray. The church joins with me with a hearty amen. When you think about it, we spend much of our lifetime as adults running away from childishness. In fact, we frown on people who exhibit elements of childishness. When you think about it, one of the worst offenses is for somebody to call you childish, especially when you have a whole mortgage, kids and cars, debt that you got. It's a slap in the face for someone to say you are behaving childish. Most of it is because when we think of the idea of being childish, there are a few characteristics of a childish person that quickly come to mind. A childish person does not control their emotions. You think about it. Kids have no control over that. They can be happy one minute and literally, not even a split of a second, they can burst into tears. No control of emotion. Childish people blame everyone and everything for their problems. You know how it is. You've got relatives like it. Nobody here. Relatives who blame you, blame the man, blame everybody for their poor decisions. Childish people. Childish people lie at the drop of a hat. I mean, instead of fessing up and facing what they've done, facing the music like an adult, when they're faced with the reality of the truth that hits them, they lie. Childish people are impulsive. These are people who cannot control where their heart goes. When their heart tells them to jump, they jump. If it say cuss them out, it cuss them out. I know I ain't talking to nobody here. I just know I'm not. Childish people aim to be the center of attention. They want the world to revolve around them and everyone in it to bow to them. Childish people bully people. I know as I've even run through this list, you got 5 people in your mind you're thinking of. Some of you are sitting here saying, why is he holding a mirror up to me? Childish people. Part of being a grown person is learning to jettison the reality of childishness. Yet, Jesus calls us back to one element of childishness. And this text is tailored to teach us that in this life, we must cultivate childlike dependence on the Lord. Implied in the very statement is the idea that mature faith is a childish faith. Mature faith is not indicated or indicative of how long you've been a member of a church. Mature faith is not based on your age. It's not based on your position. Mature faith isn't even the spiritual paragon you might imagine in your mind. The very picture of a mature Christian is a Christian who relates to God in a childish manner. Think about it. Children believe almost anything you tell them. I'm just be honest with you. People who know me know I'm honest about me. There is an element of me that is very childish. I ain't gonna try to post myself like I'm the giant or the paragon of what it looks like to have childish dependence. But one of my childish tendencies is I get a joy out of tricking people. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I will find a prank, a joke to crack on you in a hot minute. Don't catch yourself slipping, because I will catch you and I will blast you. It's just what I do. My wife will tell you that, and my family would tell you, that when I get in a certain mood, usually when I'm tired, you kind of just got to pray for your boy, because I say a lot. One of the things that my kids do when they come up to me, and Kelly ain't seen, she ain't visible, my son, specifically Watson the fourth, would walk up to me and say, Dada, where is mommy? And without even think about it, I'll see his gullibility, I see his naivety, and I say, how can I maximize on this moment? Pray for your boy. And as they're fixing their mouths to say, "Where's mommy?" She ran away. Now, logic will simply tell the child, you ain't heard the door open or close. You know she has to be somewhere in the house, maybe the bathroom, but all I had to do was tell you she ran away. And like a child, he believes me. And you'd see him. He don't do it no more. He'll say, now, Dada's just playing. But he would bust out in tears. Don't call the people on me, people. But there is a sense of gullibility there where he believes what I say because I'm his daddy. Childlike dependence. He can tell me to pick him up by his ankles upside down, and he ain't even gonna grab his head because he know his daddy ain't gonna drop him. Childlike dependence. This is the picture Jesus has when he calls us to that level of maturity, where Jesus wants to look at you and I and to see a childlike dependence on him. Jesus says it in Matthew 18 that we miss the kingdom if we don't become like a child. And so the probing question of the text is this: how do you become like a child? And David in this text is going to lay out three very clear ways or things that we do to develop and cultivate a childlike dependence. The first thing we do is you've got to confront the self. The strongest weapon you fight is you. Strongest weapon I fight is me. It ain't nobody outside of you that poses a greater threat sometimes than you. You can tell yourself that you ain't gonna do some things. Even when the opportunity is clearly there, you can tell yourself you ain't gonna do it or you can't do it. Sometimes self is the biggest thing to conquer. But the part of self that is hard to grapple with is the part of self that tends to conflict with God. It is the part of self that makes us prideful. And one of the first ways that you confront yourself is by combating your pride. David says it very clearly at verse 1. Lord, my heart is not proud. My eyes ain't even haughty. This is the picture where David is saying to God, my head has not swollen up. I don't walk around looking at people thinking that I'm better than them. I see myself for who and what I really am. A hot mess on a hot day. He says, I am not proud. My head is not big. My eyes are not haughty. He's simply bringing us to this place to say that to grow in childlike dependence, we have got to confront ourselves by combating this very tendency towards pride. Can I be real with us? The hardest thing it is for us to do is to grapple with pride. This is the part of us that tells us to be more concerned about ourselves. It is the part of us that bends in towards ourselves, that tells us to place our preferences, our desires, our opinions, our wills over and above God. It's the part of us that tells us I will maintain control in my life even when God is trying to wrestle control from me. It is the part that will never admit that I am wrong. It is the part that will never like to accept help when I most need help. It is pride. And pride in the scriptures always is painted in such a way where God is antithetical to pride. He is in opposition to pride. Not to be legalistic here, but he stands and looks at our pride and says, it is the part of you that balls your fist up at me that says I am very much against. It is the part of us that can hear what the Lord is saying and say, I choose to not do it because I choose to drive my own life. He says, you've got to contend with your pride. The greatest example we understand of one who exhibited a life that fought this thing is Jesus. Jesus, who had every reason to be proud. Jesus, who had very real, see, most of us are prideful and think we're something that we're not. Everybody who knows you knows that you are messed up. Everybody who knows you well enough, who's had a conversation past a hello, has seen and know very clearly your faults. They know your blind spots. But oftentimes we see ourselves as higher than what we are. Jesus, who had every reason to boast and to be proud, exited his throne, throwing on cloaks of flesh and entering into this world and living a life that you and I could not live, to die for a bunch of people who could have cared less for him. Jesus Christ would take on his back the sins of people who were not righteous, people who could have cared less, people who weren't trying to go to church, people who weren't trying to serve him. He would humble himself to take our mess. And think about it, none of us would barely ever take anybody's mess. The moment somebody throws mess our way, we say, take your mess on down the street somewhere. But Jesus grabbed our mess and put it on his back. Took on the form of a slave, Philippians tells us, and lived this life in humility to the point of death. Jesus exhibits this humility for us and calls us through David's words to combat our pride. Because Jesus, who has died to grab a hold of your life, is wanting to sit in the driver's seat of your life and to control it. You know it's nothing worse than driving somewhere with a backseat driver. You know who they are. They're the ones who sit in the car and tell you, first off, they control the climate of your car, you know, the one you paid a note for. And they control the music in your car, you know, the one you put the gas in. And then on top of that, they're the ones to say, slow down because you went 1 over the speed limit. These are the people who are quick to grab the steering wheel when they feel like you about to hit another car, even though you got control of it. Can I tell you something, friends? Jesus sits in the driver's seat of our lives, and he is always trying to wrestle the steering wheel out of our hands. But we so busy being backseat drivers, trying to control the life that we think we control, but we really don't. And Jesus is trying to say, why don't you let your pride take a back seat? Why don't you humble yourself and let me drive this car? Relinquish the steering wheel of your soul and let me take matters into my own hands. The first way that you confront the self is combating your tendency for pride. But can I tell you another way you confront yourself? By considering your limits. Look at what David says here. He says, I ain't big-headed. I don't get involved with things too great or too wondrous for me. He says to God, there are things in this life that are way above my pay grade. He says, I don't put my mind in business that ain't mine. He says, God, there are things that you do that I may never understand. Seasons that I'm waiting to come that I may not grab in my own hands. He says, but that's too wondrous and too great for me, and I don't reach to try to grab something that is beyond me. Can I bring the human element of this? This is a wonderful thing because there was no greater person to say this than David. Can I tell you why? David was called by God to be king of Israel while there was still a king on the throne. Imagine David as God is saying, you're going to reign over these people. And the very king who sits on the throne drives David farther from the throne. You've got to see David sitting in the caves by himself with the ability to kill Saul and says, that's too much past me. I ain't going to do it. You got to see David as he's sitting there wondering, when is my time to shine going to come? He at some point had to come to understand that God's seasons and God's doors and the locks that he holds to those doors are his business and not ours. There are seasons that he only turns and things that he only brings about, and it ain't up for us to know it. It's getting cold, ain't it? Except for this nice little 50-degree weather day. We remember this week when it dropped below 30. Some of us are lamenting even now because we weren't preparing to have to pay no high gas bill until January. But now, needless to say, we are here and the weather is cold. But no matter how much you beg God to change the weather, no matter how much you look at the snow and say, I hate the dirt it accumulates on my car, no matter how much you say, I'm tired of wearing the layers and I can't wait to throw on some shorts and go down to the shore again, no matter how much you say, I want to snap my fingers and make the weather change, you can't change the seasons because the seasons are above your pay grade. Jesus is trying to say to you that you cannot alter the seasons of your life. Can I speak real? There are some of us in the room right now who are agonizing and in pain because you are too busy trying to kick a door open that God is not trying to open for your life. Some of us have been broken by relationships that Jesus has been saying, it ain't your time to hold that relationship. But you and I have been so busy trying to pull ourselves into something that is above our pay grade. Part of grappling with ourselves and confronting ourselves is learning to recognize that we got limits. That even though we think we control some stuff, you don't control nothing but the stuff in your own house if you really control that. You didn't control the doctor when the doctor said you were sick. You ain't even controlled the sickness when the sickness hit you. You ain't controlled the recession that took a little bit of your money. You didn't control the bills that you struggle paying, but we think we got this thing that we control some stuff. But God is saying part of confronting yourself is recognizing your limits, because when you see your limits, you understand where God begins. When you realize there are some things that are beyond you, some doors you can't kick open, some opportunities you can't make come, some decisions you can't make that only God can make, you come to see your limits and you then confront yourself. But can I tell you something? That's not the only way that you cultivate a childlike dependence. You do it in one sense by confronting the self, but it's very simple. You also do it by calming your heart. The heart is a terrible thing to try to get a hold of. The Bible tells us it is dark and deceitfully wicked. Who can know it? I don't have to convince you. You can wake up right now and feel something and not even know why you feel it. You can smell a fragrance that you ain't smelled in 20, 35 years, and it can drop you back 40 years to the person you was with who had that fragrance, because the heart is an interesting thing in and of itself. But part of calming your heart is learning to control your heart. Can I show you what David says? He says, I ain't controlled with all this stuff. I'm not dealing with things that are above me. He says, instead, I have calmed. I love that he doesn't say it has calmed or even you have calmed, but rather he says, I have calmed. Well, what's implied in the statement is that his heart was calmed by him. He says, I have calmed and quieted my soul. See, the soul in the Old Testament understanding was not your spirit. The soul was the whole of who you were. It is the essence of who you are. It is the seat of your will and your volition. It is where your desires lie. It is where we kind of get this understanding of your heart. He says, I've gained control over it and I've made it calm down and sit down. See, your heart, which is the seat of your emotions that run fast and far like a wild horse, it is something that must be tamed, controlled, and quieted. That there is a sense where you have got to learn to control the strings of your heart. There are some of us who understand that our hearts have broken relationships. Our hearts have led us into deeper lonelinesses. Our hearts have led us into deeper depressions. You have got to learn to control your heart. There are some of us in the room who have zero control over what our heart feels. Our heart leads us down a street and we feel like we should go there because our heart tells us to go there. But yet David says, I have learned to control that thing. I have calmed it and I have silenced it. Again, what better person to say it than him? David in 1 Samuel chapter 30 verse 6 finds himself in a place where he is facing peril. His own people that he reigned over and led His own people were preparing to stone him. And the text tells us that he was deeply distressed. You want to know what that means? He was depressed. He was deeply discouraged. And you know what he did? The text says that he strengthened himself in the Lord. Let me put it in plain old Watson language. He talked to himself. He told himself in the Lord to chill out. He saw his emotions rising up, and he tackled them things with something stronger even than his words. It was the Lord. That's why it says he encouraged himself in the Lord. That there is a sense that when your heart is running wild, the only thing that you can use to tame it is the very words of God, to grab a hold of your heart, to make it stop, shut up, and sit down. Some of us need to just tell ourselves to stop, shut up, and sit down. When you feel like you want to cuss somebody out, tell your heart to stop it, shut up, and sit down. When you feel sin knocking on your door and you feel like you tempted to fall, tell yourself to stop it, shut up, and sit down. There is a sense where you've got to calm yourself by controlling your heart. But not only do you calm yourself by controlling your heart, you calm yourself by being content in your heart. Deacon Cleet, I done said a cuss word. This word contentment ain't something we like. Come on, be real with your boy. I'm in the same seat as you. I don't like contentment either. Contentment don't feel good because it in one sense means you got to be okay with what you don't have. Oh boy, and you and I are so used to looking around and seeing what others got. And we can feel that jealousy, can't we? I'll just talk to myself. I can look around and see what others have. What others have accomplished by my age, what others have said and seen and done, and I can feel the discontentment riding up in my soul. And David says the way that you calm yourself is by making yourself be content in your heart. Can I show you what he says in the text? He says, I've calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. My soul is like a weaned child. Now, at the risk of alienating the men in the room, follow me down the street as we talk to our sisters in the room. Many women understand this one here. This simile clicks. My wife, who breastfed all three of my kids, and you can kind of tell because one of them still is a little bit rotund because he had human food. When the time of weaning came, oh gosh, there was no time rougher or more violent, almost comparable to when the baby is teething. And I remember one day we would wean our kids the day after their first birthday. Well, Kelly was colder than me. She did it the day of one of their birthdays. We'd let them enjoy that one day. It's your 1 year happy birthday. Smash this cake in your face, enjoy it, because we know what's coming tomorrow. And one day we were slick because we had done it with 2. And now there was one more. Flew my parents out to see us in Philadelphia. They didn't know what they were getting into, but we said, come on out here and spend time with your kids while me and the wife going on somewhere on a nice little vacation for 3 days. Parents came in. Little did they know that Ellison was being weaned the day they arrived. This is when you know your parents love your kids. When you leave them with them and you come back and they're still alive. I don't know how she did it and how he did it, because that weaning situation is a violent situation. This kid who had only been out of the womb for a few moments is used to being up on the mother's breast whenever the child is hungry, thirsty, or needing to be comforted. It has his mother's breast to do it. But when you wean a child, you pull the breast back and you put some space and distance between you and the child. The child thinks that it is facing death in the moment that it is screaming. But what the child doesn't understand, that the mother is doing something necessary by not doing something in order to make the child grow. I want you to note the simile here. The simile says he is calmed with its mother. Meaning the mother ain't never left, but the mother had to instill in the child a sense of content dependability, where a sense where the child was able to be away from the parent and not lose it, that the child was able to scream and cry, not get what it wants, and understand how to calm itself. Can I talk to us plainly here? God is standing at some of our lives right now, and he is withholding some stuff because he's been trying to wean you for some time. You've been used to feeling that feeling every time you pray. You've been used to feeling that feeling every time you sing. You know the feeling when you said, I'm going to recommit my life to Jesus, that feeling. And God has been weaning you by not giving you some things to teach you how to be content. But you ain't content without him. You are content with him. That he ain't left you because you're crying and because you're screaming. He has not walked out the room because your heart is in shambles and it's broken, but rather he is trying to allow life to make you content. And so he weans us by making us content. He spoils us a whole lot. But some of the things we don't get and some of the things we don't receive, God is withholding something from us because he is doing something deeper in us. So when life turns you upside down, be content in your heart because God is just weaning you. When you can't understand why God has unleashed all that in your life, understand that God ain't mad at you. He don't hate you or dislike you. He is weaning you. When it feels like things won't change or get better, God ain't mad at you. He's cloaked you in the blood of Christ. You are as beloved as you ever gonna be in Jesus Christ, but he is weaning you to make you grow. But he says you've got to calm your heart to develop this childlike dependence. And you calm your heart by controlling it, and you also calm it by being content. But can I give us the last thing? You don't just develop childlike dependence by confronting yourself or by just calming your heart. Two very important key things you've got to do, but I'm going to break the alliteration for this one. I couldn't think of a C to say it, and I think the text said it even better. The third thing you do to cultivate childlike dependence is hope in the Lord. We can struggle with this four-letter word because we are naturally predisposed to be pessimists. Yes, it's true. We treat people automatically from the basis that they're acting on a negative motive because we lean on the foot of distrust before we actually do on trust. Think about some of our relationships. We assume the worst out of people because we naturally distrust people. So when people do something we don't understand or we don't quite get, we assume malicious intent because we naturally lean towards distrust. But in our culture that leans us toward distrust, it leans us towards pessimism and even hurts our ability towards hope. But David understands it well. David tells the people after this prayer to hope in the Lord. He says, Israel, put your hope. And he understands that hope is empty and powerless when it's not anchored in something else. You can hope that your situation's gonna change, but your situation is temporal or it can feel very permanent. And if your hope is only in your situation doesn't have a mind or a will to change itself. But hope is only as powerful as it can be when it is anchored in someone. That's why David says, hope in the Lord. But I hate to get textual on you, but I got to make you see it. When you look at what he says, I want you to note in your translation of the scriptures that he's not saying Lord, lowercase O-R-D, but rather he says Lord, uppercase L-O-R-D. There's a subtle point there because that name, which I won't say, that name is the name that God used to introduce himself to the people of Israel. It is what theologians call his covenantal name. It is the name that says, as long as you know that name, you know that I have not left you. As long as you know that name, you know that I have made myself your God because I have redeemed you. Let me just take it down to the street. If you know that name, you understand that God in Jesus Christ has cloaked you and grabbed you and brought you close. And because Jesus was forsaken, God has promised that he won't forsake you because he has covenanted himself. He says, don't just hope in your people. Don't just hope in your money. Don't hope in your power. Don't hope in who you think you know. Don't hope in what you think you know, but hope in the Lord. But watch this. David understands that we are fickle. Not just you. I'm fickle too. Choir, y'all fickle. Deacons, y'all fickle. Reverend Hinton, you fickle. Ushers, y'all fickle. Church, y'all fickle. We in this thing. He understands that even before dementia sets in, we got a short memory. He understands that we at one point can hope when things are bad. But the moment the tide turns and things began to go our way, we no longer hope in the Lord. Can I prove my point? We will pack a church out when we can't pay our bills. We will call on the church and ask for all kinds of prayers, multifaceted prayers. Everybody pray, deacons pray, preacher pray, Sunday school teacher pray. But the moment you get $4 extra in your pocket to be able to pay that bill you ain't paid last month, God becomes an afterthought. We don't pray half as hard because we hoped in something else. But he says, don't just hope in the Lord right now, but I want you to hope now and forever. Can I tell you what that hope means? That hope means you hope when it's good. That hope means you hope when it's bad. That means you hope when it's dark. You hope when it's light. That means you hope in life and you hope in death. Hope now and you hope forever. It means if doors get slammed shut in your face, you hope now and you hope forever. He says you hope when you can pay your bills, you hope when you can't. You hope when you got friends, you hope when you're lonely. You hope when you're loving it and you hope when you're hating it. He says hope now and forever. But can I take us deeper? Because I don't think we really get the weight and the understanding of what hope is. See, hope works a certain way because hope in the Lord literally means waiting on the Lord. It is waiting on the Lord when you don't feel like waiting on the Lord. Because hope always has a future orientation to it. Hope is always leaning on its toes, waiting to see what God is going to do. Not because you made up what he's going to do, but you have hoped in him, i.e. hoped in his word. Because his word promises that his promises are yes and amen. You hope in his word, namely what you find in this holy writ called the scripture. And some of us are pessimists and hopeless folk because we ain't ever in this book. This book just sits somewhere on the table and it's a paperweight. It's something that looks nice in a nice cover that we never actually crack open to eat on. He says hope has this idea of waiting. It is hoping on what the Lord says he will do. Not what you think he said he's going to do, but hoping on what he says he's going to do. But can I tell you, this notion of hoping on the Lord is not a new notion. It traces its thread throughout a scripture. Abraham, who had passed his age of having a child, is told by God that your wife is going to have a child. Some of us ain't read that Bible in a minute. Let me explain it. His wife had never been able to have a child. And by the time God says what he said, that thing had already happened. Some of you women understand it. And she was now unable to have a child. And then God has the audacity, the unmitigated gall to say, you're going to have a child. In fact, you're going to be the father of a nation. Abraham hears this, and Paul tells us that he hoped. He hoped, and he waited, and he waited, and he hoped. He hoped and he waited until one day Isaiah came. But can I tell you who else hoped? David hoped. David, while being sent far away from the throne that he would occupy, who was told by God that he would occupy it, all he had to hang his head on was a promise that God had made. Can I paint the picture even more? The promise looked like God might have even been lying. The fact that God said, you're going to be on this throne, and the one who is on the throne is chucking spears at him. He hears these words, and he hopes, and he waits. He waits, and he hopes. And one day Saul dies, and David is made king. Can I tell you somewhere else you see it? This text, as it was written by David and some of his followers. And later on in the post-exilic period, or in the period after, in the exile, when the people of God were sent away, all they had was a hope that God would deliver them because he said he would. And so they hoped and they waited. They waited and they hoped until God sent Cyrus on down the stream. And Cyrus says, oh, Israel, gone back home to your place. But then when they got back to their place, it was not quite what they lost. They did not have a king, even though God in his word said that there would be a king that would come from the stoop of Jesse. But Jesse's line had been destroyed. And they sat there as Rome occupied their land and oppressed them as a marginalized people. And they hoped and they waited. They waited and they hoped until one day 3 wise men looked up in the sky and they witnessed a star that was shining bright, because down somewhere in the ghettos of Bethlehem, in the back alleys of somebody else's house, not at the Ritz-Carlton, not at the Waldorf Astoria, not at the Drake Hotel, but down in the alley of somebody's low end, you found Jesus laying down in a manger with animal stench wrapped all around his body. They hoped and they waited. They waited and they hoped. And Jesus, who had wrapped himself in human flesh, would live a life that we could not live, and to die a death that we should have died, and to carry your sin and my sin and your shame and my shame and your guilt and my guilt, and packed it down on the back of Jesus Christ. And all of creation hoped and waited as Jesus sat there and he died on the cross. All of creation paused for a second to witness what nobody saw coming, but the angels hoped and they waited and they hoped. And one day Jesus punched a hole in death, moved the door of the tomb, and he rose again with all power. And he went to sit next to God, and he's coming back. And what do? We hope and we wait. We wait and we hope, because part of hoping helps us to cultivate a childlike dependence. I'm about to be done. There was a boy who went to the store with his mother. And I'm just going to tell you now, that mother wasn't a black mother. You'll see it. They walk into the store and the mother says something very familiar that you all have heard before. Don't ask for nothing in this store. Now, I used to think my mother was just capricious and evil when she said it, until I had my own kids and realized that you just ain't got the money. You wasn't planning to spend it. So don't ask for nothing when we walk in the store. So the boy walks into the store with his mother, and he's sitting in the basket. As soon as they got in the store, he disregarded what she said. I told you it wasn't a black mother. I want some cookies. No, I'm not giving you no cookies. Don't ask no more. She goes around the cookie aisle and the little Intamin section at the back of the store. She steered clear of the bakery section of Jewel. And the son says, Mommy, I want a cookie. No, you ain't getting no cookie. They get to the checkout line. And the boy remembers the words of his Sunday school teacher that says, ask and it shall be given. Seek, you shall find. Knock, and the door shall be open. He remembers Sunday school teacher saying, you have not because you ask not. Only he'd been asking the wrong person. So sitting in that seat, he begins to pray. God, I want some cookies. Lord, will you make a way for me to have some cookies? I want some cookies. The mom is starting to get embarrassed as she's finishing and she's about to check out. He realizes the checkout process is almost over and they both are about to check out. God, I want some cookies. He's hanging his head on what God said in his word and he's waiting. Suddenly a woman, 2 people behind, begins to feel annoyed. Why won't this mother get this boy a cookie? And something happens in her heart where she is stirred. She grabs the cookies off the stand, you know, the grandma cookies, checks them out and gives them to the boy. The boy prayed, hoped, and waited as he was about to check out. And then he got his cookie. Can I talk to us for a second? Some of us are in that checkout line and we have checked out of faith. We have checked out of church. We have checked out of Jesus. We have checked out of trusting him. I know some of your faces I see every single week, but you come to church because that's just what you do. But if truth be told, there are parts of you that feels like I have checked out on dependence on the Lord. Because I've been asking and waiting and praying and hoping, and I have not seen the fruit of my prayers, and he has not given it, and I'm on the verge of checking out. And Jesus is watching you as you're sitting in that checkout line, waiting to check out to say, can you just have some childlike dependence on me and to hope on my word and to hope on me before you check out? Because when you let hope cultivate your ability to have childlike faith, you don't check out. Because you're always on your toes, waiting on the Lord. Childlike dependence waits on the Lord. Childlike dependence, when it gets tired, finds strength in the Lord, because they mount up on wings like an eagle. They run and they don't get weary. They walk and they do not faint, because they sit hoping on the word of God, even when they're hoping against hope. That's how you develop childlike faith. That's how you develop childlike dependence. You've got to hope in the Lord. You cannot develop it without hoping in the Lord. But you only hope in the Lord when you confront yourself. You hope in the Lord after you confront yourself. You calm your heart. When life is hard and it is lying to your face, when your bills are saying they ain't never gonna get paid, when you're feeling like your page ain't never gonna turn, your chapter ain't never gonna end, stop letting these things lie to you. Calm your heart and make yourself hope in the Lord. That's how you develop childlike dependence. Jesus is waiting to see who's going to develop it, who's going to have this childlike dependence that trusts him even when they feel like they can't. I'm done. All heads are bowed, all eyes are closed.